Today, I'm joined by Patrick Boyd, the founding partner of the Boyd Law Group, a firm that has become a powerhouse in labor and employment law across New York and the tri-state area. Patrick has built a reputation for representing high-level executives and businesses in high-stakes negotiation, but what sets him apart is his focus on the human element of the law. We are going to explore the legacy of IBM that shaped his career, the preventative medicine approach to legal counsel, and the hard truth about why speed is often the enemy of quality in the legal market. We will also dive into how Patrick manages high volume of leads while trying to solve the quality over quantity puzzle in modern marketing. Patrick, welcome to the Growth Switch.
Thanks, Alex. Great to see you again.
Pleasure to have you. Patrick, let's go back to the story of your grandfather and IBM, if you want to tell how that started on the path that you are today.
Sure. Yeah. I think when we spoke last, we were talking a little bit about what got me involved in the field, and indeed, it was my grandfather who was an important part of raising me. And when we didn't talk about the Mets or the Jets, and anybody who's a fan of the Mets or the Jets knows there's been a lot of losses and not so many great things to talk about. He would often tell me about his job at IBM. He got out of the Navy in World War II, walked across the docks to an employment office and got a job at International Business Machines, which later became IBM. And when he retired, decades and decades later, close to 4 decades later, he was one of the few people without a college degree that had hit a director level in personnel. So when he talked to me about not the Mets or the Jets, he would talk to me about work and about IBM. And it was one of those great times in our country and in our workplace life where you could choose a job and stick with that job for a really, really long time and start to feel like you had a chance to share in the wealth that you helped to create with that job. He got stock in IBM while working for that job. He got to make decisions about how to provide benefits and pay to people at IBM. And one of his tasks was IBM was a non-union organization. So one of his tasks was to figure out how to offer as good or better benefits and as good or better job stability and pay so that people would choose to stay with IBM as opposed to go somewhere else. So we spoke a lot about his job and about labor and employment. And that's really what drew me to the field that I've been practicing in now for almost 2 decades myself.
When you first decided to pursue that and you went to the law school, were your expectations of maybe being adversarial with opposing counsel or things like that, did they meet the reality, or how did you experience going from watching your grandfather to actually then practicing the law?
Well, there are certainly times when we're counseling businesses, right, who are collaborating with their team members and just trying to get better policies, or when we're representing executives who are making a transition from one job to another, right, and just trying to get a great deal that works for everybody, where the exact same tone and approach that I heard from him resonates, right? But the adversarial process of law is real, Alex, and there are certainly times where there are fights that we have in the litigations that we have and in trials and in examination of witnesses. So I would say there's a little bit of both. It sort of just depends on the transaction you're involved in or the experience. It is certainly the diversity of it that makes it exciting sometimes, which I guess is part of the equation.
Could you maybe think of an example when there was an opportunity to be adversarial, but again, looking at your grandfather's example, you took maybe a more compassionate route, and what impact did it have?
I guess the best example, and there's a lot of them, Alex, is when we're representing people who have been with businesses for a long time. They have an argument with the business now, right? But they've been with them for quite some time. And in those cases where if it was a very short tenured employee and there was a legal claim, we might send a letter or even send a drafted lawsuit, right? When we're representing those employees who have been with companies for a long time, we often first counsel the employees to talk with maybe the manager that they used to work with, or somebody maybe even who's left the company first, just to say, hey, I've got a lawyer, but maybe there's a chance we can work this out without getting the lawyer too deeply involved, right? And even if that doesn't work, plenty of times, and indeed the majority of the times when people have 10 years or more with the company, I won't send that nasty letter and I won't send that drafted complaint. I'll make a phone call first and see if I can get somebody on the phone. The phone calls can be adversarial in part, Alex, right? We're representing our client and they have grievances as to the employer. But those live conversations when a litigation hasn't been filed and a judge hasn't been assigned yet can be very collaborative conversations where there's a little bit of fire and a little bit of ice and a
Mhm.
lot of common ground potential.
It's always good to explore those options so greater conflict can be avoided. In your grandfather's era, of course, like the story that you shared, somebody could find their career, stay with it for a very long time, and be very happy.
For
And we
sure.
were talking earlier that nowadays, your tenure might be 18 months in a company on average. The churn rate and rotation is much greater. In the conversations that you are seeing, how did it impact the way the relationship are built and also the way the relationship ultimately come to an end?
Well, I mean, I think implicit in your question is the answer, right? If you've only been with a company for 18 months and not 30 or 40 years, just by virtue of that, you have less depth in your relationships. Certainly, I think remote work adds to that too. If you've been with a company 18 months and you've only met your boss twice in person,
Right.
then I think that changes the dynamic too. I think it leads for the engagement, the workplace experience to be far more transactional.
Hmm.
And frankly, I think that's to the detriment of everybody. I think that
Mm.
companies would benefit if employees had a longer line of sight for how long they'd be there, and I think employees would benefit more if companies were thinking about the longer term side. I think both sides would benefit more if there weren't these short term relationships, but short-term relationships they are.
Mm.
The vast majority of my contacts from college, I went to an Ivy League school, and most of them have had jobs every 1 to 3 years, just a job after a job after a
Mm.
job, which is, I just don't think it's great. It's also tough for families, right? Because if you want to have a house and a car and some children and put away money for college, you want the stability of knowing you have a job and a paycheck coming in. And if that job keeps coming and going and that paycheck keeps coming and going, it's harder to choose that house, that car, that college, and it's just much more stressful.
I think as a society, we lost out on having that culture. In your practice, have you seen examples when both the employer and employee, they come into the relationship with open mind that it might be a tenure for 18 months, but the way they structure their relationship still gives that opportunity for something long term. And maybe there are some things that you notice as green flags, something to be replicated.
I would say that there are companies, and a lot of times I'll see this with European companies actually, where they're European and then they come to the United States, where they will offer a contract and it's, a 3-year contract, for example, with then maybe, provision that says, and within 90 days of the end of the 3 years, we're going to sit down and try and talk about negotiating for another 3 years, right?
Hmm.
Those contracts can be wonderfully useful in terms of trying to establish a long-term intention, and they do kind of necessitate, by virtue of the structure, the anticipation of an ascension for the employee. You're
Mm.
starting here as an analyst, and we expect that in about 3 years, your salary is you're going to be a senior analyst, and then we're going to talk about your future. I think that helps, Alex. Also, I mean, of course, stock helps, right? One of the reasons my grandfather was able to enjoy and appreciate and grow with IBM was because he had stock in the company, right?
Hmm.
The challenge with respect to stock, though, is of course it's subject to a vesting schedule and defaults. And so it just doesn't really change that much these days. People just figure they will trade their JP Morgan stock for Goldman Sachs stock or whatever.
Right.
So the stock in and of itself, while I think it creates a unity of interest in terms of overall profit structure, I don't know that it adds that much to the stability of the relationship the way those longer
Mm.
term contracts do. And just notably, I mean, I've been working on Wall Street contracts for the better part of 20 years. I don't know that I've ever seen a contract for more than 2 years. So it's it's
Mm.
it's sort of the absolute exception to the rule to have longer term contracts in that arena for good or bad.
I've been talking to a business that had a very interesting approach to hiring, specifically sales function in their example. They created a very clear progression that basically, upon meeting certain KPI, rotated new titles, increase in bonuses, increase in salary, and it was quite well scripted. So the salesperson knew exactly where they are, even though it was a limited contract, and what they need to do to the next level. Do you think even if it's a 2-year contract, most companies maybe just not putting the effort in to create that structure so that it's a more transparent relationship, what is necessary to go to the next level that ultimately would create more certainty for the business, but also for the families and for the employees?
I mean, I think you're right. I think it's a missed opportunity in that people aren't thinking long term about their team members anymore. So they're not creating that sort of brass ring to grasp for in year 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right? I'd also say that the law is really designed to be very employer friendly. The law is designed to be free movement of capital. You can keep somebody or let them go on a moment's notice if you want to, right?
Mm-hmm.
When I'm on the employer side of the equation and looking at a contract, if our client says to us, I'd like to give this person a 5-year plan, I
Mm-hmm.
often say to them, well, you can, but you don't need to, and that's not market. And if you do so, you have to worry about them trying to sue you for breach of the promises, depending upon how those promises are manifestly put together in writings.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the legal structure that we have, which probably isn't changing anytime soon, is does not encourage that kind of
Mm-hmm.
thing. And it's probably a little bit of a chicken or the egg question too, right? If people think longer term, might contracts, if people are there for longer, might employers think about longer term contracts? Or do you have to offer longer term contracts to think about people choosing to be in the job longer? I don't know. I know that, and we've talked about this too. I know that Western Europe, as an example, has
Mm-hmm.
a far different employment relationship with a lot of junior and senior people. And I think because of the statutory scheme that protects jobs for longer and makes it harder to fire somebody, people have to think about longer term goals and aspirations and collaboration. And on balance, that's probably a good thing, although it's also true that the same job probably pays a meaningful amount less
Mm.
in Western Europe because we're going to pay you consistently, right? But we're going to pay you less because it's consistent, as opposed to the New York, we're going to pay you a lot now, but who knows what's going to happen next year kind of model, which
Yeah.
has its upsides and its downsides, I suppose.
More volatility in that
Yes,
regard.
that's right. That's right. That's right.
You mentioned promises about, in a conversation about making the plans for 5 years as well. One of the things when we spoke earlier, you mentioned that you've seen some, handshake deals that were around conditions, potentially 500,000 bonuses and options that ended up with just a handshake deals. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you've seen made because it was a handshake deal and maybe at the time not completely thought through?
I mean, on the individual executive side, I bet you each year I see millions of dollars lost by clients who chose not to take the time to document their entitlements. They were told they were getting a sign-on bonus of X and they were delighted, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't bother to read that the sign-on bonus was something they could lose if they got laid off within the first year, or if the company decided that they weren't hitting their KPIs for that year or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
The failure to discuss, right, and the failure to document is costing people. It's probably costing people hundreds of thousands of dollars in New York each week, right? And
Mm-hmm.
it's a challenge, right? A lot of times people are told, by the way, here's your contract, this is it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they just sort of they think of it like it's their cell phone contract or the papers you sign when you get a mortgage or something, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would argue it's not. It's a far more personal, bespoke document that deserves some time and consideration to get it right. Now, sometimes you ask to get it differently and you just can't. But I even think that if you plant the seed on your first contract that you'd like it to look different, you have
Mm-hmm.
that better opportunity come next contract time to have a better, more thorough discussion in the future.
It's probably a compounding effect in the relationship with the company that if you don't protect your interests in the beginning, it will be impossible to do so later on.
That's right. That's right. And by the way, impossible for your colleagues to do so later on because,
Mm.
well, Joe already signed. Joe signed. Here he is. So you
A
do have
bit of social pressure.
that's right. You do have to think collectively about that.
Right.
But the best of our clients, and indeed one CEO that I was working with a couple of years ago gave me a tip that I've now passed on to a lot of other clients. In his first contract, he wasn't getting what he wanted in documentation, right?
Mm-hmm.
But he trusted his leaders and he trusted in the future. So he agreed to the contract, but sent an email after the fact saying, we agreed upon these things, but we also agreed to talk about these things and
Mm-hmm.
to have these discussions later. And I look forward to that. And he wrote it down, wrote the email, put something in his calendar for close to the time of his bonus time and close to the time of his contract expiry. And that discussion then and that documentation then just sort of manifest a trajectory for further discussion and progress. And it wasn't adversarial and it wasn't a, hey, I gotcha. And, you got to do this for me later. It was just this is what we were thinking about, and I want to make sure we revisit where we were thinking about to know where we're going next, kind of thing. So it's something that I've often told clients to do after they finished executing their contracts with certain companies.
My guess would be that a lot of that is probably psychological fear. If you have a good offer, the thought process could be that, well, if I start being difficult now, I will lose this opportunity altogether. But reality, in my experience, shows that it's better to have the difficult conversation because everybody is better off and everything is documented. And if something needs to be discussed later, like you said, you can mention that and that's fine. From your experience in your practice, does the positive of having that conversation always outweigh the concern somebody has of losing the opportunity? Or did you also see an example when somebody genuinely missed out because they raised those questions?
I guess my best answer is I've never seen an offer revoked because somebody was asking questions about it.
Mm-hmm.
I've even been surprised on situations where I've told clients, look, I think you've had enough of the discussion. And they've decided to go in and have one more and
Mm-hmm.
still gotten the deal. But I've been very privileged, I think, in representing a lot of people who are, they're successful going for that next contract, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so they know how to lean into their goals and construct them in a manner where it is a company goal also, right?
Mm-hmm.
Hey, boss, I really want to talk about my bonus here. And it's not just because of what I want to get paid, it's because I want to be doing the things you want me to do so that we all make
Mm-hmm.
money, right? If you pivot on that discussion correctly and present it correctly, it is true, right? Nobody hires somebody wanting them to be a lousy employee, right? Everybody
Mm-hmm.
hires somebody wanting them to succeed and excel and drive a lot of money. So if you think about it that way and you find mutual wins, which sounds kind of corny, but is still true, then I
Mm-hmm.
think you can have a thorough discussion without it being adversarial. Yeah.
And to have the thorough discussion, one of the things we spoke about before is the idea of prevention is better than the cure, right? That having those conversations, bringing it up is always better to do in advance and have a more adversarial situation later on. What are some of the examples that you've seen both good and bad in terms of when somebody preemptively addressed an issue and that there was a good solution, as well as somebody who was procrastinating maybe on resolving the conflict and then it's really spiraled out of control.
I've had lots of clients who have come to us with, particularly the Wall Street clients, who come to us with the dangling bonus, right? That
Mm-hmm.
they want, that's offered without any consideration of the clawback, right? Comes back to
Mm-hmm.
bite them. They get their $500,000 bonus. They wanted their $500,000 bonus. It's payable within 30 days, and then they just got laid off, but the bonus isn't there anymore. They got to pay back half of it or
Mm-hmm.
something, right? So a good example where, they have that bonus and I say, let's look at that bonus. Let's look at the clawback. Let's just go through it. You mentioned it. They just want it so badly that the immediate gratification of agreeing to say they got it and get it in the bank account leads them to not think about the clawback risks. On the other hand, and I'm meeting with a former client Monday
Mm-hmm.
that I've been working with for years and years and years on contracts. It's a New York office of a European company, and every single year he would have a very thorough discussion. He would have 3-year contracts sometimes, but every single
Mm-hmm.
year he would have a
Mm-hmm.
very thorough discussion with his boss about goals in person, right? Goals for him, goals for the company. And boy, he's killed it for that company. And that company is grateful to have him. So just one of those really deliberative people who takes the time. Of course you have to have a willing party on the other side, but who's taken the
Right.
time to cultivate his career and life by virtue of having those discussions about goals each year and stages to evaluate the accomplishment of those goals.
Now with
I mean, you would just so you have a sense of it. So we get maybe 50 to 60 prospective client calls a week, right? You
mm-hmm.
wouldn't believe, Alex, how many people receive offers that are worth millions of dollars. And
Mm-hmm.
they get the offer and it's 18 pages and they get the offer on the Monday and they want to sign it Tuesday without thinking about the details. I mean, even basic things like how many days vacation. They just they get it, they want to move it, they want to move on, and they just it's a and this is their life, right? This is how they're going to spend the majority of
Mm-hmm.
their year, is honoring the terms and conditions of this contract. But the let's think it through kind of thing is just it's a little bit absent. And they're high achievers. I mean, they're out there doing other things, but
Yeah.
this is a foundational document that really deserves time.
Absolutely. Do you think there is enough education online to educate those professionals? Because if the trend is like we discussed that they are not having decades of career with the same company, they will rotate every 18 months or plus or less on average. Is there enough education to tell them that you need to take the extra time to review it, consult a lawyer, have somebody look over it, don't rush into it? Or is there still a gap for the information for the professionals on the steps to take to protect their interests?
I mean, I think there's two things going on. First, for whatever reason, people are still very private about their finances in our country and in our culture and in our neighborhoods, at least in where we are here in the tri-state area. So I think one of the opportunities for education that is talking to your, the other men and women in your neighborhood, at your pizza parlor, at your coffee shop, whatever, is an opportunity lost. And then I think what's replaced it, which is even worse maybe, is this quick sort of fast food answer that you can get from your chat GPTs or your Claudes or whatever kind of thing. I think those tools are magnificent for giving a sense of the things that you might get, right?
Hmm.
And it's great when people take that time to put it in and think about what they might want. But there's so many different ways to accomplish particular financial goals in contracts and in employment.
Hmm.
And I think too many people are taking the quick approach to getting they get quickly a map of what they might have, and then they quickly decide I'll take this, this, and this, and then they just don't want to think about it anymore in ways that can be unfortunate. Opportunities lost.
I think everybody is trying to play a lawyer and a doctor because they have quick access to the information, but the
Yeah.
context is everything, right?
Well, that's right. And what is, especially with law, what is permissible and acceptable in New York is so different than California. Is so different just in New York City than in Westchester County, for example, with certain things. So, trust your professionals. When you're sick, go to see your doctor. When you've got a contract, give your lawyer a call. It's the right approach to my thinking. That doesn't mean not to look things up and try to have some information also when you go to see your doctor or your lawyer. But yeah, I think there's
We have a joke internally that sometimes people get that advice very wrong when they procrastinate with doing something they should. And it could be equivalent of saying that, well, once I feel better, I'll go see a doctor. Right now I'm sick, so I don't want to go out. Same
right.
could be with the lawyer, right? Like once the problem is resolved or it's too bad, then I will consult with somebody. Well,
Yeah,
it's too late by that point.
yeah, that's right.
You mentioned something about the geography as well. Are there any particular reasons why not taking proactive care about your contracts, whether you are an employee or employer, is specifically dangerous in New York of all places in America?
Well, as an example, there are certain extra protections you're allowed in New York on what you disclose or don't disclose about your salary in negotiations, for example, or in how much time you're allowed to consider a severance agreement or not before you have to sign it, right?
Hmm.
Or in whether or not there is confidentiality about the severance that you have. Those things can be very state specific as employee rights, and it's really important to know that. And a layperson wouldn't know that, right? They would say, "What's fair for my severance?" And ChatGPT doesn't know any better than to say, "Well, it might be good to do this or that." But the ChatGPT answer for Idaho is going to be a lot different than California, a lot different than New York. And that distinction, you might not know to ask ChatGPT, and you might really miss an opportunity. And I mean, there's just so many great lawyers out there that really know what they're doing and that really want to help people. That it's really kind of a missed opportunity not to call the professionals, even for a couple minutes. I think to talk to somebody. I mean, for as an example, like I said, we get 55, 60 calls. 50 of those will talk to us or hear from one of our team members that they probably don't have a legal claim to pursue, or I'm sorry this happened to you, but
Hmm.
we can't help that much. I mean, we're not out there trying to ring the cash register every single time people call, and we're out there to make sure there are people that we're talking to that we can help, and that those people we can't help, maybe we send somewhere else, or we just frankly say we're sorry, but there's not a legal solution for this
Right.
for this problem.
I do want to talk about the calls that you're receiving about the quality versus quantity, but before I do, having obviously the experience of the decades of doing this, what are some of the things that you do differently as a firm internally with the way you write contracts or have the conversation that you perfected over doing this for as long as you have?
I think like anybody dedicated to a field, I don't think we'll ever perfect it, right? We're always working at getting better. I think maybe the thing that the best practitioners do and that we try to do is to make sure that we put the employment law experience of our clients in the right context. It's easy when you have the volume we have, right?
Hmm.
To be a little bit too transactional. But each call and each contract has a man or woman, maybe a house and a mortgage and a family and kids and grandkids and
Hmm.
parents all hinging on it. And so decisions being made about how much to be paid, how to negotiate what you're being paid, how much to accept in severance, those decisions have some big impact on lives and on dignity of people and families. So I think when we do it best, we try to first let the client know if they're stressed about things that they're not alone.
Hmm.
Lots and lots of people are talking to us and going through this, and they'll get through it, right? And then second, once they have that comfort of knowing they're not alone in the subject, to try to be thorough with them in thinking things through. A lot of times nowadays, Alex, my advice is, okay, I understand, and these are some solutions, and let's think about it a little bit. Let's maybe even sleep on it.
Hmm.
Just the pacing that the work decisions deserve, because work is so important, is, I think, the thing we do best with the right amount of compassion when we're doing it best.
You've had the example of your grandfather when you first started, and your compassion certainly comes across when you talk about it. Internally, as a team, is that something that you had to coach for and train for, or is that just how you hired and everybody working with the clients that you are gets it?
I think all of our team get it on the one hand, but I think we all do our we all do one another best when we remind each other of the subject. The other day, I was calling into a client and talking to them, and I was, so we got to talk about Section 3 and Section 4, and right. And
Hmm.
my colleague who was on the phone said, "Yeah, just by the way," to the client, "how was your vacation?" And slowed down the tempo in a way that was helpful, and sort of checked me
Hmm.
because I was too deep into the focus of the practice. And the client really appreciated it, and I really appreciated it too. So
Hmm.
I think we try to hire to find the right people for that. I think people are attracted to this area of practice who have that sentiment anyways, but always getting better at it.
It's always a progress. Right now, you said that you're receiving 50 to 60 calls a week, and not everybody is a great fit, but it's a good problem to have when there are a lot of people interested in working with you. Was that always the case when you started your practice?
No, not so much. I remember when we first started, I had an old handset, and when a new
Hmm.
prospective client call would come in, the associate working for me would put a post-it on my phone, a yellow post-it, and
Hmm.
I know, okay, I got a new client to call back. And I even remember rounding the corner to my office and looking to see if there was a post-it on the
Hmm.
phone. This was a big thing. So it certainly hasn't always been that way. What else were you asking? I'm sorry.
What initially gave that boost, when you started receiving the calls, and how did it grow into getting the volume that you're getting today?
I mean, the best answer is I'm not completely sure. I think we do a good job. We've now integrated a place where we make sure we have introductory calls with clients and set up the experience. And when the matter's over, we have conclusion calls and discussions sort of about what happened, what transpired, and those kind of things. Not for every single matter, but certainly for the more
Hmm.
substantial ones, just to get feedback at the end on things. And I think that a lot of times I'll have that closeout call with the client, and they'll say, "Thank you for helping. By the way, I just told my sister to call you," or that kind of thing. So sometimes that follow up helps, but I think that's a protocol or a procedure that's part of the same theme, which is just the better you know people and the more they think you care, the more likely they are to refer you to somebody else. And I've been surprised, Alex, on this. You certainly have people wanting good results, right?
Hmm.
But clients, if you have a good rapport with them, they understand you're not always going to hit a home run. I get plenty of referrals, probably as many clients who I hit home runs for refer me clients as clients I just hit singles for.
Hmm.
As long as you manage expectations thoughtfully, and give the clients a good expectation of what's going to happen, and do your best, people are pretty good about that. They appreciate the work, and they appreciate the work and the thoughtfulness, understanding that not everybody's case is worth $1 million.
What do you think is a function of having that opportunity to choose the clients to work with on the quality of work? Because the reason I'm asking, a lot of smaller firms that starting or growing new practice areas, and they only get referrals as the way of new business, and they feel pressured to take every case on, and not every case is a good fit. And as a result, that might impact their quality of life, the results, and then the reputation they have.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it's a great example. And certainly when we were first starting, we would take cases that, you know, we would not take now, right? I think I will say this because we're saying no to a lot of people, right? I think people appreciate the thoughtful no, and I think it's not implausible at all that you might talk to a prospective client and say, "Geez, I'm sorry, this
Mhm.
shouldn't have happened," and "Geez, I even think you have a legal claim, but it's a little too small. It's in a different place. It's not our area. We're not going to be good enough at it." Those thoughtful no's sometimes result in people then later sending you business. So
Mm.
I think it's good to be comfortable with the no, right? But also don't look at the no as I don't even want to bother calling back. You know, try to have the no conversation with some substance to it. That's hard to do with the volume that you get these days because everybody wants a call back the same day sometimes. And that can be tough. But nevertheless, when you can to engage in the thoughtful no, I think is important as a matter of business.
You probably understand it better than most because it's your practice, you've grown it, so you have that deeper relationship. Did you have to train and coach your colleagues on that as well?
I think maybe. I think in the beginning, it's a very tough circumstance, Alex. In the beginning, when people start talking to people and they call and they've just lost their jobs, right?
Hmm.
The junior person, they feel terrible and they spend 45 minutes taking notes, you know, because they feel terrible that the person lost their job, irrespective of whether they have a legal claim. So yeah, we coach on that. We try to give a good timeline for how much time to spend with people,
Hmm.
and I don't know that it comes naturally. And I think anybody compassionate is capable of giving any person calling, you know, hours on the phone. And we have to understand what our role is in the relationship and when we can help and when we can't. And to a certain extent, if we're talking with somebody for 45 minutes and we can't help, we're wasting their time. They should be calling somebody else who can, right? So try
Hmm.
to think about it as serving them that way. But yeah, it's a hurdle for sure.
Hmm.
And people call very upset, and it's hard to be um, quick when you're talking with somebody who's very upset. People take their jobs very seriously. It's your faith, it's your family, and it's your job, right? These are the defining characteristics of the human experience for a lot of people. So when they lose their job, they feel like they've lost what they spent most of their time doing for most of their year, maybe most of many years, and it's tough.
It's part of their identity, so it's always
Absolutely,
personal.
yeah, absolutely.
What does the ideal client looks like for you when you get that call and from the conversation they're in a difficult situation, but instantly you know that it's somebody you can help and it would be a fantastic person to work with?
A person that is respectful of our team's time is really important to me. Plenty of people call and they're not nice to the team members, and then
Mm.
they're nice to me. And if you
Mm.
don't think that gets to me, you're mistaken, prospective clients out there, right? People who are forthcoming in their details about their cases and patient are often the best ones because those who can and have the time to think will allow us to collaborate with them on the thought process for things. So I think as to characteristics, those are the ones we look for the most. It's hard to say beyond that because beyond that, it's really about how strong the case is, right?
Mm.
Sometimes it's a great case and we want it because of the issue that we can advance for that client and for other people who might be treated similar to how who might be mistreated in a similar way if we don't fight for them. So that's that's obviously another component. We get the luxury of choosing, and we love cases where it makes a difference on that sort of plaintiff side case or that discrimination case. We want those cases where we can make a difference for that person and lots of other people.
Have you also found in your practice that if you communicate whether the call that you described at the end of the case, and then you maybe do some marketing around that this was the case, this is how we helped, it helps to attract similar people that have a similar position and are also a great client for you?
I think it does. When we have those conclusory calls with clients, we will sometimes summarize the case and with the client's permission publish some kind of summary of what happened, not with identifying details, but something like that on the website. And we do get plenty of clients who call us saying, "Oh, I saw, on your website you did XYZ. So it's just like my case," or something like that,
Hmm.
which helps. Unfortunately, Alex, though, with the clients coming in, most of the time what we'll get is, "Oh, we saw some great stuff on your website," or something, right? we we,
Right.
we don't always get Well, I just saw a similar case this way, or I just saw your interview on XYZ TV or
Hmm.
something like that. I think the combination of the charity work and the TV interviews and the reviews and things, I think that all helps. But as a business owner, it is challenging, Alex, to know which of the things helps most. And at some point in time, you want to help the prospective client, not sort of dissect the way that led them to come to you. So that can be challenging. You don't want to say,
Right.
"Oh, hang on, before I help you, can you tell me what?" It's an awkward conversation to have.
Absolutely. Outside of having that conversation, because with the volume of calls you're getting, you certainly can be asking, how they found you in detail every time. What are some of the metrics? Because you mentioned quite a few channels and the marketing activities that you do. What are the metrics that you look at your marketing to judge if it's going in the right direction or if something requires your attention?
I mean, I think the most basic, of course, is volume of calls, right? And then dollar value assessment of the clients that came in based on those calls. So if we got, you know, 300 calls in a month, how many clients paid us and how much on the one hand, that's a dollar value. And then
Hmm.
how many contingent cases came in if it's a case where we're taking a percentage, and how do we value those cases? And then you look at the amount of calls, the
Hmm.
dollars you attribute to those calls, and try to get some kind of analysis or some kind of comparable analysis of the two. I think that's at least a good starting point from a macro perspective, if that makes sense.
Certainly. Were you always good at recording and analyzing those numbers, or did you have a moment when the volume got to a point when you had to systematize it and do things differently?
I think the best answer is that I still don't think we're as good at it as we need to be. The volume continues to go up. Our ability to dissect the data is a very important thing that we don't have all the time to do or all the resources to accomplish. I mean, we have two support staff who are helping us do that a little bit better, but I think we definitely can get better at it. And I suspect there are places and ways to get better at it. We keep adding little pieces of software to make the practice a little bit better,
Hmm.
but we've got a long way to go. And as you say, it's a good problem to have with the volume of the work, but I do think an opportunity we're still missing at this point to a certain extent.
Continue to improve. Just like you described your work, I think, with marketing as well, it's never done. There's always things that you can do better and optimize. In terms of people that you worked with, whether internally or maybe with outside partners, when you as an owner of a firm think about a good marketing partner, what are the qualities or attributes that you're looking for?
I guess the thing that we don't have, or I don't have a great sense on as we talk to people, and we're talking to people about recasting the website and doing some other things even now. I think that the thing that's most interesting is understanding from them what places like our place are doing.
Hmm.
Comparables is because you can have a lot of professional connections that you talk to, right? But you're not really going to talk to your competitors,
Hmm.
and you're sure as heck not gonna have, if you do, even if you have a collaborative relationship with them, you're not gonna say, "Hey, let's talk about your profitability," and those kind of things.
Right.
So to the extent that somebody can give us that detail or that important information, I think that would help. We just worked with somebody like you and we did X, or they were doing Y, or they were doing Z. I think is important. And honestly, I think there's a little bit of an absence at the bar association on that. I think lawyers
Mm.
are hardworking, focused on their cases, so they're not necessarily collaborative about business models as much as they might be, and that's an opportunity that's probably being missed from the bar association perspective. But I know for me, just as a personal interest, social media is this wonderful tool that I don't really understand in terms of its impact on the practice of law. I'm a big, like, I love guitars and guitar music, and I love watches. This is actually my grandfather's watch from World War II.
Nice.
Um, yeah. So I get feeds about watches and guitars all the time. And if I were to when I buy a watch or a guitar, it's because of what I see as the feeds. So I know it's an effective marketing tool,
Hmm.
but I don't have a great sense of how it would play out from the practice of law or how to use it best. And I don't know that I've seen a lot of lawyers doing it effectively yet.
Do you think it's better to sort of stay in the lane in terms of you have channels that are working for you and you measure in the metrics that you described? Or if there are opportunities, whether it's social media, and like you said, there are some lawyers who make it work, but it's a little bit of unpredictable. When you think about your strategy, do you leave space for experimentation to say, oh, it would be interesting to allocate the budget and see if it works? Or do you see it as a distraction?
I think it's important, but it's probably not where it needs to be on the importance Rolodex. For us right now, we're doing some talent acquisition. We're hiring people,
Hmm.
and choosing to hire the right added team members is a really important thing that deserves a ton of focus. But I don't know that I've ever met, and maybe two notable exceptions. I don't know that I've ever met. I rarely meet lawyers who give enough focus to A, marketing, or B, the novelty or novel ways to market. I think it's a
Hmm.
definitely not something that is, I mean, we're not taught to think about it in law school, Alex, at all.
Right.
So, yeah, I think it's a blind spot for sure in the business.
That's a really good point because in law school we are not taught the business of practicing law, and this is something that you have to learn on the go.
Yes.
Do you have maybe one controversial piece of advice that you've learned to be true that you would have given younger self?
Yeah. I don't know if it's controversial. Maybe it is. It's not all about working harder. I think a lot of lawyers, and I was part of that grouping, just thought more hours spent was really important. Every morning I try to either read for about 20 or 30 minutes, something non-legal, right? Or play the guitar. And then, well, I do that. Then I put in an hour's worth of work, and then I go for a run, or I, go to the gym or whatever. And I honestly think that I'm a better lawyer because of that time with the guitar and that time with the book and that time on my run than I would be if I had put another 2 hours in of working.
Mm,
It just allows me to think and breathe and listen to our clients as opposed to talking to them, which is important. So, yeah, the hot take is lawyers should work less, I think. Maybe.
I think somebody will hear that and take it to extreme.
Maybe
Wisdom with
so.
wisdom, they will adjust.
Maybe so. I find most lawyers work just work and work and work and work and work. And there's super powerful and talented women and men, but even the best of us don't do our best work on hour 70 or 71 or 72 or hour 80 of the week. We just don't. And yeah, I think the years have taught me, what does the romantics say? In the years that bring the philosophic mind, right?
Hmm.
That a little bit of enjoying the human experience, not just the practice of law, makes me better and makes me better for clients. And I encourage that of the young team, get your walk in, get your workout in, get your time at the concert in, get your vacation in. It's important. It makes us more relatable.
Patrick, where can people find you online?
Sure. So if you just anybody does a search by Patrick Boyd Lawyer, or our website is www.theboydlawgroup.com. And yeah, you can find all kinds of blogs that we're doing, writings that we're doing, cases that we're working on, and obviously contact us if there's a way that you think our firm might be able to help you in your employment law life. That "Don't Worry, Be Happy" was the Bobby McFerrin song, and we sort of stole from that a little bit. Let us take the worry out of your work is our motto. So, give us a call if we can help. And yeah, we like doing it. So that's something.
Sounds like it. Patrick, thank you so much for coming. It's been a pleasure having you.
It's my pleasure, Alex. Take care.